to be our 25th Jane Dwyer Memorial Lecturer. The Jane Dwyer Memorial Lectureship was established in 1983, the year after Jane Dwyer, who was one of the former directors of the museum, passed away. And friends and family of hers, friends and family of the museum, as well, decided to organize a memorial lectureship in her name that would allow us to bring speakers from around the world to talk on issues of museum studies, archaeology, anthropology, etc. We've had a great, as you can see in the sequence behind us, we haven't met every year. I think this is the 29th year since the lectureship was begun with the 25th lecture. We've had a wonderful series of speakers and performers who've been able to bring the world to Brown. And in this case, we're able to bring Sven Haakanson to Brown, which fulfills a desire I've had for quite some time. Before I came to Brown, you can't see anything without my glasses. I'm beginning to feel like I should have an abandoned chair here that I talked to. Before I came to Brown, I did archaeology in a number of places, and as I was thinking about my doctoral research long ago in the 1980s, one of the places that was virtually unknown in the northern world at that time was Kodiak Island. I was a graduate student at the University of Michigan. I was interested in questions of hunters and gatherers and social complexity, chieftains, etc. I think we would have called them at one point. Those are two issues, hunters and gatherers in complex societies, that people didn't talk about very much at the time. But as I was looking into those issues, one of the places where the ethnographic record, the ethnohistoric record, suggested very large, very complex, very dense populations of people who lived without agriculture, but with reliance on the resources of the land, the seas, and the rivers, had been in Kodiak. There was very little archaeology done at the time, and so another graduate student and I, in 1982, made a visit to a place called Carlip on the southwest coast of Kodiak, and a year later, with a grant from NEH, began a survey down the Carlip River in the interior. And this is actually the very first day having arrived in the interior. That's me with hair that isn't white and a full beard on the side. We were told at the time that there was no point in doing the survey, that everyone knew that the Alutiiq people, the Kodiak people, Swiftback-speaking people, had not lived in the interior, that it was all a coastal adaptation. In the course of 10 days, we identified 35 sites, including villages that were almost 1.5 kilometers long, in places where otherwise the only living things around us were bears, deer, otters, and birds, a lot of eagles. I spent the next 2 summers on Kodiak, working as part of the Carlip Archaeology Project, and that project grew and developed in wonderful ways and created a very transformative view, I think, in many ways, of Kodiak prehistory and also for the people. I remember the second year we were there, not long after this, we did our first presentation to the people of the city of Kodiak on the material we'd found. We'd found well-preserved basketry in a site that dated back from the time of the Russian colonization until about 1200 AD, and these were probably from the 1600s. There were a few women who were making baskets at the time. There were very few people who spoke language, or a few language classes at the time. And we were swarmed. We said that we found baskets, but we couldn't show them because of conservation issues, and that was simply not going to go over well. And so we wound up taking the baskets out, and I remember the women, well, I showed them from inside of a plastic bucket. What they would have said, no, we need to see the bottom of them. We need to see how these baskets were started. And I flipped it over, and the gasp at the time was amazing. All of these women intake of breath, and I said, what's the matter? I said, that's exactly the way we make our baskets. But we have not known, because of the complex history of this place, whether the baskets we make now are the baskets our ancestors made at that time. And that made a relationship between the archaeology and the present day and the past, to me, deeper than anything I'd experienced up to that point. When we turned over the next basket, the gasp was even deeper, because that began a basket in a way no one in that group knew how to make. And people were immediately sitting and taking notes and beginning to think, how do we rebuild this part of our culture? So I left that long ago and went off to work in other parts of the world, but I've kept my eyes on Kodiak for a long time, and you cannot put your eyes on Kodiak for very long without seeing Sven Haakanson Jr. And I've wanted to bring him here for many years, and I'm glad we're able to bring him tonight. In coming to Brown, the other person who really transformed my life and made me want to come to Brown to work more than anything else was Douglas Anderson, pioneer in Arctic anthropology and Arctic archaeology, who I have the privilege of working with and to be able to work on collections that he's developed over the past 55 years in our collection center in Bristol. And I will now turn the podium over to Doug so that he can do an introduction for Sven Haakanson.
Okay, well, thanks, Kevin. This is really a privilege for me, too, now, to be able to introduce Sven Haakanson. Sven, as you just heard, is the executive director of the Alutiiq Museum, or Alutiiq Heritage Museum in Kodiak Island on that. The museum itself, I think, really should be given some details, I think. That it's the museum, it's what I would consider a relatively small local museum, but that museum has become a showcase for what can be done with a museum and how a museum can fulfill its duty and obligations to a local community, while at the same time being able to further research and in a sense, presenting information to the world at large. Sven, as director, has really developed some really innovative and some thoughtful kinds of programs there, in addition to the displays and all, which of course a good museum has to have excellent displays, but from a number of different kinds of programs that I think are so important on that. I just want to go through just a list of just a couple of the programs that he has developed himself on this. One of the things that he developed a language program through the museum there that includes teaching second language learners. He organized a grassroots group made up of elders throughout the island on that to teach, to inform the teachers about language and culture, early cultures on this. He developed also a program to broadcast language and cultural lessons on the public radio. Now, this is something that in other parts of Alaska, I've just been amazed, why don't other people do this? And it is around in some places, but this has actually come to fruition on Kodiak Island on this. And he's even developed an interactive protocol for web users to be able to learn about all aspects about Alutiiq life on this. He's also, though, directed archaeological excavations through the museum on that, in conjunction with other archaeologists and all. And he's led a large-scale study of sacred Alutiiq sites to identify and archive petroglyphs and other rock arts. And now this is something that one knows about petroglyphs and rock arts from other parts of, say, Western America, Northwest coast and all. But to have a program up on Kodiak Island really does open up a whole new area of interest and research over a large area on this. Sven has also, though, conducted ethnographic and archaeological research in Asia, and especially the Yamal Peninsula, which is up on the northernmost peninsula on western Siberia, there in an area that's very remote. It's an area that is known as a location of reindeer herders. It's one area now of Russia that has become kind of a hot spot. They found oil up there, and so there's a right now very much of a tension between the indigenous peoples, the Nenets up in that area, and the central government that is trying to extract the oil there. The kinds of lessons that that we are well aware of here in Arctic America and Arctic Canada there. In addition to that, he's organized a very widespread loan program for Alutiiq materials that are sent out to other schools and museums in Alaska itself, as well as some programs that have sent materials to other parts of the world. Russia, for example, Denmark, a number of other of the countries. So all of this then shows, in a sense, that the museum, the Alutiiq Museum, is one of the most active museums that I'm certainly aware of, certainly in Alaska, on this. And this is, I would even certainly they don't have the money to say that the Alaska University Museum has, but I think for the innovations that are going on, that the Alutiiq Museum is a place to look on that. One other aspect that I think is really interesting is that Sven and his group has developed a detailed museum guideline for what's called the spiritual care of objects. Now, the spiritual care of objects, I've seen lots of protocols dealing with the care of objects, but the spiritual care of objects is a particular focus. I think partly because Sven himself is an Alutiiq on this, but also because of his training and his innovativeness and all has really brought something really quite unique. And I think this is going to be modeled by a number of other museums around the country, especially museums that are in areas where you've got indigenous people who are really concerned about the museum and even working with or in the museum at all on this. Sven has a number of publications, especially dealing with the museum materials, objects, especially masks, Alutiiq masks and all is one of them, plus a number of articles in a whole variety of academic journals. I won't go into the list of those on that. He's a member of the Polar Research Board, which is one of the driving forces on what kinds of agenda one should see for future work in the Arctic or circumpolar world. And as a member of that is a very important component there. Now, a couple other things I'll conclude by on this is that Sven is no stranger to the Half and Repert Museum. When he was finishing up his Ph.D. work up at Harvard, he came down to our museum frequently, visited the museum, so he is well familiar with our collections here. I should also say that with the language program, he has also hired one of our own graduates from Brown here, who is also an Alutiiq on this. So that Sven has a number of connections with us on this. And so I'm very happy to introduce Sven and his talk, Using Collections to Explore Local Heritage, Lessons from the Alutiiq Museum. So Sven Haakanson.
Well, first, I want to say thank you, Dr. Thank you, Kevin, for the introduction. But just to clarify, the reason I've been able to do so much is I have an amazing staff. I have wonderful colleagues I work with: Amy Steppian, April Council-Lactonen, Patrick Saltonstall, Jill Lipka. I mean, I have a wonderful team and a team of friends I work with, so that I'm able to actually achieve this. But also, it's a team effort to do what we're able to do. It's not just me, it's them as well. And I happen to be their spokesperson. But for me to be working where I work, it's a real privilege. and a real honor. What I'm going to share with you tonight is what we've been able to do in the last 12 years. Working with the museum, using the museum as a tool for change, for positive change, and a way for us to understand our history, and a way for us to learn from it so we can move forward making healthy choices. So the journey I'm going to take you on is our museum. I'm also just starting to get used to my glasses. So, as you heard, Kevin, one of his first introductions to the Kodiak bear. And I find it really funny that that's your mascot, the bear itself. These are common critters. And well, the wonderful thing is, as we've explored our history, explored the archaeological record, and explored our ethnographic history and working with the elders, understanding and respecting the bear is something that we're starting to teach our visitors. Hunters today, they come in, they shoot the bear, they take the skull, they take the skin. And when we drafted up the care for spiritual objects, this is one of the first things that we were taking into consideration of how we understand and treat bears, because they were seen as people. They had a soul, they had a spirit. And for us, we not only need to take care of ourselves, but we need to take care of our environment. And so part of that is educating the outside world about what we have in front of us and what it means. For a bear, traditionally, we had the bear give itself to us. We took the meat, all the bones, we left the skull facing north-northeast, and then the skin came out. And then after we processed, ate the meat, we brought the bones back. So it was completely opposite, and it has been completely opposite of how we treat the bear today. And so by learning about the traditional respect, we can actually teach each other respect. And it goes both ways with native and non-native. And it's a learning process, and this is only in the last 12 years we've been able to bring this out because the elders didn't want to share these stories. They didn't want to say these are important because nobody was listening. And so having the museum as a platform, but also as a tool for getting information to the community. And here I have sustainability. Without our community's involvement, we are not relevant. How do we remain relevant in our community? What is the purpose of the museum? What is the purpose of any museum? And so these are questions that we ask. I ask myself all the time. To stepping back, okay, it's our history, it's our past, it's our present, and it really is our responsibility. In order for us to understand who we are, we have to know our history. Or as my father is quoted with the Looking Both Ways catalog that worked with the Smithsonian, you have to look both ways in order to move forward. And so with that, I've had the privilege of living in the Yamal Peninsula, Russia. And I'm now located over here where I was born and raised. I'm from Kodiak. And I'm going to go a step back, give you an idea of who I am and where I actually got my foundation. As graduate students or as students, what you're learning now is very, very important. Because it's going to give you a foundation to be able to actually make choices in what you do. I had the privilege and the honor and knowledge, honoring the knowledge of our ancestors by using what was collected by outsiders. I had the privilege of living and working with reindeer herds in Siberia during my graduate studies. And in that, traveled to Yamal Peninsula, Russia, working with the Smithsonian, working with Bill Fitzhugh. I was invited in to live and work with reindeer herders. I was doing ethnoarchaeology. And at the time, very few people then were doing this research. It was ethnoarchaeology. The Russians thought I was nuts. Why do you want to go live with them? They can't teach you anything. But for me, my experience there of seeing how they were living, having their children living. I mean, there's a living culture. Traditional ways of living, language, beliefs, heritage, all are passed on in a living context. And that really opened my eyes up to what was right in front of us, what was right in front of me. And that experience made me think about how can I use this at home. As you heard from Kevin, when he went to Karluk, very few people knew about the history. We had probably about 100 speakers. We have less than 40 speakers now. But we are teaching it in the schools. We are teaching it in the college levels, thanks to April Counselor Lactona, Dr. Counselor. But we didn't know anything about it. We didn't know about our history. Our language had been forgotten. And up until 20 years ago, most of the people are like, I'm Alutiiq. That's what the Russians labeled us. You're Alutiiq. I had elders when I was growing up. Larry Matfay's house is right here. He was like, you're Sukhbia. Well, who's Sukhbia? What does it mean? It means a human being. They translate it as a real human, or the real person, the real people. But if you really translate it, literally, you look at it, it means the human being. And so, how do we use this history that we know that goes back 7,500 years, if not longer? How do we use that? How do we teach from it? Well, Kodiak has had, like the Aleutians, a while. We discovered that site in 1992. 1784, August 13th, Shelikof came, conquered. Alaska was under control of Russia from 1784 to 1867. 1867, the American period, Alaska was sold to present to a couple of years ago. We're still here. But what happened in that time period? Why did we go from, if we took Shelikov's accounts, he says there's 50,000 natives. Okay, based on archaeological data, 10 to 15,000 maybe. What happened to the people? In January, I was asked to write a paper on Captain Cook. And mind you, all these discoveries are happening literally in the last couple of years. It's just all of this stuff is starting to open up in front of us. I was asked to do a paper on Captain Cook, and I'm sitting there going, well, Captain Cook never came to Kodiak. Well, we want a native perspective from Captain Cook, or what native impressions are of Captain Cook. And I'm like, but Captain Cook never came to Kodiak. How can I write something like that? And well, we want you to write something on that. And I'm sitting there going, how do I make, I'm not going to make anything up. And so I was told, well, why don't you look at these journals? I'm looking at these journals. And then I'm talking with Rick Knick and Gordon Puller. But, well, look at the officers' journals. See what they have to say. So I started reading those. And looking at where Captain Cook went. He went up into Prince William Sound. And he writes about being up there, going down, settling down in Alaska. Well, what was more fascinating is his officers' observations. Sandball, etc. And I'm reading them, and they're talking about when they came into Prince William Sound in 1778, the Chugach people, they go up, they have their open boats, their onyaks, they have their weapons to defend themselves, they have their sea otter skin clothing, and when Captain Cook's men, they write this in their journals, they tried to entice the women to come on board, the women are like, oh, go bugger yourself, we don't want anything to do with you. They had the ability to say, no, go away. We're not going to do as you're going to tell us. Well, they sailed down, and what was interesting is I found out when they sailed down, they didn't actually go past Kodiak because they didn't want to run into another Cook Inlet. So they stayed on the east side of Kodiak, sailed down to Alaska. I found out in reading those journals that they labeled two places where I grew up. Cape Barnabas and Two-Headed. I didn't know that those names came from him. And so that was interesting to learn in January. But when they got down to Alaska, the officers write about what they saw. No more open boats, so people couldn't move entire villages. No more weapons to defend themselves. No sea otter skin clothing to be found. And this is 1741 to 1778, and then 1784 when Alaska was actually claimed. But 1778, they're not in Alaska. And so I'm reading the journals, and I'm sitting there thinking, okay, how is this possible? How can we deal with this? How do we address it? Well, I mean, and I apologize for reading text, but I try not to do this, but this is someone's description when they went down through one of the houses in Alaska. Through them, which we descended down a ladder made of a thick piece of wood with steps cut into it, into a dark and dirty cave seemingly underground, where our noses were instantly saluted with a potent stink of putrid fish, which was scattered about the house. We were welcomed into these murky caves by the master of the house and his wife and other females sitting together in one part of the hut. Having been used to many strange scenes since we left England, we spent no time in staring about us with vacant astonishment, but immediately made love to the handsomest woman in company, who, in order to make us welcome, refused us no favor she could grant, though her husband or father stood by, and thus paid proper attention to the women, etc., etc. And 3 different references of what happened in Unalaska, in the officers' journals. First of all, I'm sitting there going, well, if you come in with a superior weapon, and you don't have a weapon to defend yourself, of course you're not going to say anything. But what was happening to the women, and what was happening to the men? They had no way to defend themselves. His crew was going in and raping the women. Made love to. Oh, we paid them, and then another reference, oh, we gave them trinkets, we gave them beads and other things for their favors. 6 years later, the same thing happened to Kodiak, and so on and so forth. And so, as I read this, my first impressions are, as a native from the beach, is, holy smokes, we're still dealing with some of these issues. And this is from ethnographic accounts. We're still dealing with these issues today. We haven't addressed what happened as a people. Oh, and a lot of times I read this stuff and I just want to throw the book across the room. Luckily, it was Patrick Saltonstall's book. He had the thing, and so I didn't. But I loved looking at Weber's drawings. But this is what Weber drew after that scene. And to me, this picture, I used to look at this. Wow, look at the bentwood poles. Wow, look at the brass mats. Look at the clothing. Look at how things looked in here. The ladders for the Wenongan house. But now I see a different story every time I see that. By putting the information, by contextualizing what was really happening then. And these are issues, again, I bring up, we haven't addressed, but how do we address them when they're so suppressed within our own psyche? 10 years ago, when I wanted to bring some of these issues up, I was told by a scholar, no, we're not ready for that. My question is, when are we going to ever be ready for these? When are we going to be able to move forward by asking the hard questions? How do we address the humiliation, the devastation that happened? (1803), Gideon, or 1805. In the same year, 1805, in the last days of October, about 300 men were drowned whilst returning from Sitka. Due to the onerous tasks imposed by the company, which have been described above, Alutiiqs in all settlements in wintertime suffer great hunger. When the shellfish and kelp become unavailable at the tide flats, and the tide flats are covered with ice, they consume even seal bladders in which they store oil and fermented roe of red salmon processed with seal skins or laftak, thongs and other items made of seaweed. A compassionate human being can hardly restrain his tears observing the situation of these unhappy people who resemble the dead more than the living. 1805, resembles the dead more than the living. This is a priest's observations of what was happening on Kodiak. And there's a couple others. Sawyer talks about it, but there's only a couple other references of what was happening in Kodiak at this time, between Shelikoff and Baranov's reign. And before Lydia Black passed, she was actually starting to explore what really happened during Baranov's reign. And why was he being taken back to be tried for his atrocities in 1818, 1819? He died on his way home, so nothing ever happened to him. And yet we glorify him by naming a museum after him, naming Shelikoff Straits, naming streets after the Russians. We still carry this stuff here. And to me, these things are so deep-rooted that these are subconscious things that we're dealing with. And they're uncomfortable questions. But these are historical accounts and observations. It's a snapshot of our history. Open boats, clothing, behavior, and weapons for defense are gone. Treatment of women, symptomatic of behavior today, these do carry forward subconsciously. The loss and the ability to protect our families. We are having to rebuild from this destruction. It's not discussed in historical accounts, but it happened. I mean, Cook's Cruise journals say that. Our history is not pleasant, but they're facts. And we have to understand this is a legacy of several generations of loss, and these are just the surface impressions. And Russian historical accounts give us a snapshot of what happened and what we're still dealing with in communities. And as we explore more, as we work with scholars like you, we learn more. We can ask some of these questions. How do we address them? How do we move forward from that? 1784, let's say Holocaust accounts were at 50,000 people. 1867, there's 6,000. By 1818, there's 6,000. By 1867, there's 1,200. Even if there was 10,000 that contact, within that time period, we're down to 1,200 people. Today, we're at 4,000 as a group, as a nation, as a people. How were we viewed, and what was to be done with us? And this is a snapshot from the Kuskokwim, from Herdlicka, to change the clothes, Eskimo family, and change the clothes, become civilized. After living in the mall with all my fancy gear, I froze my butt off at 50 below zero. And then I put on reindeer skin clothing and never got cold. So I know that these guys probably froze their first year and probably switched immediately back to traditional clothing because it was just much warmer and much more efficient. But today, who are we? Where are we? And the fact that we survived is pretty amazing. Subsistence life. I still go out and harvest eggs. I still go out and harvest fish. We're learning about plants. We still practice these things even today. Well, how do we put this information back into a living context? How do we share this knowledge? Daily life, running multi-million-dollar boats, practicing Russian Orthodoxy, running our own companies, celebrating the 4th of July. We've adapted. Our people are running multi-billion-dollar corporations. One of the corporations from Kodiak is the 6th largest business in Alaska. So we're extremely successful. The museum itself was founded in 1995 from the Exxon Valdez oil spill funding, and with pledges from our corporations, Canada and Kodiak, for support for annual donations. One of the things that I felt was very important when I first started my job at the museum is language. Today we have less than 40 fluent speakers. Every one of them are over 70. And for me, this is April Council-elect. She came to the museum, I think it was in 2001. From 2001 to this last year, and she's a graduate from Brown, she came and we put together a project to hire her to do language. When she came, I saw an amazing ability in this young lady. How do we support you to help us work on language? Because I can't do everything. And so we supported her through getting her master's through the UAA program and then her PhD through UAF. She's now a professor teaching at the local community college. Her first class is being offered this year in the Alutiiq language. And she's been an amazing force behind making sure the language moves forward. I wish I had her job at times. Because I mean, I would love to be doing what she's doing, but at the same time, I have my role as well. And I understand that and I accept that. But supporting her, we've got ANA funding, we've got NSF funding, I mean, thanks to wonderful people. A lot of support trying to help us move forward. To preserve our language, the museum is a repository. So what we've done is we've gone from a place that's tried to do language programming to a place that's supporting language programming. To now the college is doing it, now the high school is doing it, and other tribes are actually doing this. So we've become stepping back a little bit to keep pushing people forward, helping them, grow them, and then move forward in that process. To our other community archaeology program is, I mentioned Patrick Saltonstall, Amy Stephian. And Amy Stephian's been the backbone for all of us. She's always been there to help us move forward. Community archaeology for now 17 years. And what we do is we've been doing excavations in this place called Woman's Bay, where we have sites that go back 4,500 years. We have sites from Ocean Bay all the way up to Kodiak. And it's given us a huge snapshot in that time period of where they fished for cod, where they hunted for seal, where they processed their fish. You're talking about people living inland. That started over 4,500 years ago. And we found sites nearby Kodiak with that. And so we've got a nice comprehensive snapshot, archaeological snapshot of an area from Kodiak in that. One of the other things too that I felt very strongly about is material culture. Before I graduated, I signed a contract with the museum. I had to finish my Ph.D., but in that process, we wrote a grant to take and create a program that can actually bring the information to the villages, called Traveling Traditions. We make our own exhibit cases, set them up, bring an artist out with us, or I would figure out what we're doing, and teach that craft. As you heard from Kevin about the basket weaving, our first year we did basket weaving. So we went out and taught basket weaving. And we've done basket weaving, bentwood bowls, using the archaeological materials, hunting tools, toys or games, mask carving, fish skin sewing. And so we've been doing all these things for the last 12 years now, and trying to put the information into a living context. Celebrating the masks, trying to understand the masks, the histories, the games, the basket weaving, fish skin sewing again, and bentwood bowls. And for archaeological material, we don't have very many things with bentwood bowls, so we're using the Carlet 1 for doing this. Being inspired by what we have right here, but something that's not being done today. 2, using archaeological material from someone's private collection and making combs with kids. I'm even practicing what I preach with my own daughters, teaching them as well. And putting the information into what I consider our future's hands. Putting that information where it really belongs, where they can use it, where they can share it, as well as doing collaboration, working with camps, telling stories, dancing, fishing, language. So all of this in the last 10 years, all of these things, working with tribes. We have 10 tribes in Kodiak. And so working with the tribes as well as working with just local community members to documenting what we have right in front of us. The Cape Ballard half petroglyphs. When we started in 2000, we didn't know that there were over 1,300 petroglyphs. We had maybe 400 or 500, we thought maybe. When we systematically documented them, we found out that there's an amazing amount. There's 800 we can actually do rubbings of, but the others we have to actually sketch to move forward. And we did an occurred exhibit where we made our own petroglyphs for the museum exhibit. You come in, you can do your own rubbings. 2, okay, why don't we have all this material here? What else was here? So another part of my job is traveling to other museums and building relationships so that we can move forward. And so I talked to Dr. Lady of Black. She gave me a list of all the museums. And so what we systematically started doing is working with museums in Russia, France, again, Russia, Copenhagen, the Smithsonian even, Germany, Spain, England, Scotland, US, France, Denmark. All our collections were scattered all over the world. I was approached by the I was approached by the Kay Brantley to do a paper on masks in 2001. And Dr. Lydia Black has supported the student who did a Ph.D. on masks that were collected from Kodiak in 1872-73 by a guy named Alphonse Pinard. He amassed the largest collection of masks in the world in that time period. He kayaked from Alaska this time of year. It took him 3 months with non kayakers. They kayaked all the way to Kodiak. He spent 6 months in Kodiak. In that time period, he made a collection of over 75 masks. These masks were moved to the Château Musée in 1875. His journals ended up at the Bancroft Library, so they weren't together. So nobody really knew about them. They were first publicized in 1941, I think it was, by Lockfell, and then really publicized in 1988 and 1998 with the dissertation from Dominique Desson. And then we were asked to do a paper. We did that. We worked with on exhibit, and I asked for a loan. Would you guys be willing to loan us? In 2002, they said yes. Yeah, we can do the exhibit, we can do this. Well, somebody went to the then mayor and said, no, don't do it. You can't trust the natives because of repatriation. They won't give them back. So 2 weeks prior to me getting there, they said, no, we're not doing anything. You can come and look at them, but we're not going to do anything. This is in 2002. And between 2002 and 2006, I requested 5 different times to do a collaboration, do an exhibit, do some kind of exchange, and they were like, no, no. And most of the time the no was a misunderstanding of what we were trying to do. So what we ended up doing is we got a grant through IMLS, and I came up with this idea that, okay, if we cannot get masks here, let's get our artists there to learn from them. Because most of the time, all we see is a flat photograph. You don't get the profile, you don't get the back, you don't see any of that. And we sat down, we put an RFP, and we got proposals from 15 different artists. We went through, we interviewed them, and then we had them sign a contract that would say, okay, this isn't a free trip to France to go look at collections. What we would like you to do is make a mask for the museum's permanent collection after your experience, so we can keep that story alive. But more importantly, we want you to go and teach them in the villages during our traveling conditions. We want you to go and share your experience of looking at these collections. So it became a win-win. They learned, but they also shared with the community. And we had 5 people turn us down, but in the meantime, we went there, and we got to see the masks. We got to see the backs, the profiles, and it really changed our perceptions of what the masks were. And it wasn't just myself or 2 other colleagues who got to see the mask. It was now a group of carvers who got to see the mask and share them. So it wasn't just that. Well, when we were there, the staff realized how important these masks were. Anne-Claire Lardon realized as the director that we should make something happen. So she worked with the deputy mayor, and he's like, let's do a loan. And so we were able to select 35 pieces from that, and we did a loan in 2008. But the other important thing is showing the size differences, what the masks are. These smaller masks are all small, painted. They have eyes and nose and mouth. But the larger masks, what was fascinating is when Alphonse Pinard collected these, he wrote the names of these, like this is Amun and Unofele, Powell, and then the weatherman here. He wrote these down in Alutiiq on the back of them. And so what was really amazing is that information survived, because the collection was in Burosa now. I mean, the journals were at the Bancroft Library in California. But 2 world wars. In World War II, 85% of Burosa now was destroyed, where the masks were located. You had curators caring for a collection they had no connection with, moving them at nighttime in order to keep the Germans from getting them. I mean, that's pretty amazing in itself. And so that's a whole other story that hopefully somebody will explore one day. while we were doing our work with the elders, I went and put a slideshow up. We selected 35 of the pieces, so it was a community effort for bringing the masks I wanted. Oops. As I was going through, for example, this one here. Kennard wrote in the journals a shik, which means mistake. And then he wrote on the back of the mask, on the back of this mask, a sheret. And as I was reading these, I was trying to be scholarly and read through all the journals because they're all in Cyrillic. And I read that as it sounds, and 3 of the elders burst out laughing at me. I'm like, okay, what did I say? Well, and I'm like, well, in his journals he says this, but on the back of the mask is written this. Well, a shik means mistake, but a sheret, there was 3 elders, one elderly man, he leans over to his son, and they say something, they burst out laughing. And two other women, one is my mom, she's like, I'm not going to tell you what that means. The other elder, Florence, is like, well, if you really have to know what it means, the name of this mask means it's the one who got a little. And so I'm sitting there reading, it's like, boy, somebody played a nice joke on Kennard, so we ended up calling this mask the Lucky Fool. And so even then, people were still, they were playing jokes, but they came through even now. And so it made light of the masks, but working with his original journals, working with Dr. Lear's work and Dr. Lydia Black's work, we were able to go and translate what he wrote down in Cyrillic Alutiiq. So we used Lydia Black's and Jeff Lear's work. Then we sat down with the elders and went through. We ended up translating the songs that he collected, over 25 of them. And this one is Amud. Naniun ikayuka aufnaka kanami. Kinami pitafkanun aufnaka. And that means the old man, where is my helper? Will I find him down there? Who should I take the catch to? And it's abstract. It's old Alutiiq, it was archaic Alutiiq. And so we're still learning. The other thing too is in 2001 when the Kay Brandley published this, one of the scholars said, oh, this is a wolfman mask. And written on the back is Amun. It means old man. It has nothing to do with a wolfman mask, and there are no wolves in Kodiak. So we're kind of like, okay, well, I don't know where you got the wolfman mask from, but it was an interesting idea. But the resources that we have, we did 2 journeys, which Kodiak Corporation, Will Anderson helped publish, to working with UAF Press, where we did Kina Face, where you have the masks, you have the front profile sides. So as an artist, you can get a hold of the catalog. You can actually learn from it instead of just look at it. It becomes something that's useful as a tool for the community members. So we've done the international collaboration. Then we've done Software Alutiiq Catalog, which is now out in press in English. Working with Kunstkammer. They have the largest collection of Alaska material in the world. Just one museum, the MAE. And that collection is phenomenal. And if you guys ever have a chance to go there, I highly recommend visiting. While you don't see all the objects on there, it's still an amazing collection because the collectors collected the objects as they were used in a ritual living setting. And so the information that we've gotten out of the masks, unlike Kennard's, the bangles, the feathers still survive. The gut skin is in extremely mint condition. Looking at caribou fur, looking at cormorant versus eagle quills, use of gut skins, and all of these stuff you still can move. And the wonderful thing is the catalog is now out. It's in English. And so I worked with the MAE and we raised over $60,000 because they didn't have the funding to do it. We raised the money for them to do the publication in Russian, and then we raised money through UAF Press so that instead of paying over $100 for this 400-page catalog, we pay $50. So we raised the money to bring down the unit price. So it's accessible to all of us. And something that's just not inaccessible. Well, the other wonderful thing is having access to the collections. We started doing it, I started sketching out the model kayaks, and then started working with them as part of another project for our model kayaks. And we have one of the last traditional kayak builders, Alfred Nomoff, and he was willing to share his knowledge to help us teach kayak building. And so, working with him, we made kits. It took 3 hours to make one. We made 50 kits we made in that time period. We made 28 model kayaks with kids. No glue, no nails, all based on a traditional way. And you can go and see an Unangan kayak here, the museum here. You can see one in the back. And you can actually see the frame of it as well. But each of these kids spent over 40 hours making these kayaks in a week period. There were kids in one of the villages that had to chase them home so I could actually get some sleep. You know, it was like they were starved for the information. To working with another museum in Russia, the Russian Ethnographic Museum, on basket weaving, working with Coral Chernov. And here she was looking at a basket in January 2010. And we came back home after looking at all these collections. The same project as the weaver, the mask carvers, make something from the museum's permanent collection and go out and teach, and they did that this last fall. Well, Coral came back, and she used 7 years of grass that she collected, spent an entire month making this basket. It's probably the largest basket that's been made in over a century on Kodiak. She was so inspired by the trip. And we were able to acquire it thanks to the Rasmussen Foundation for our museum's permanent collection. But she also made another piece for the museum's permanent collection. But that in itself is pretty amazing, because it took something from the ethnographic collection to a living context, to something that even now our children can see, because we can share that with our community. We're now working with the REM on doing a publication on the baskets, and we're working with the Wharton, and this is Will Anderson. He's been very pivotal in terms of supporting us to do a lot of projects that are outside, but also helped us financially through our corporation, photographing, and he's an amazing studio photographer as well as being the corporate president for the Kodiak Corporation, to Anyaks. And what was really fun about looking at the Anyaks is there's only about 10 of these that survive in the world. 6 of them are at the MAE. Anyaks, okay, great, we don't see many of those, and they're only models. And the Russians took those right off the bat, because they didn't want their families being moved. But what's amazing about this open boat, I was talking with this friend of my wife's, Erin Harrington, and her boyfriend Ryan. He's like, you know that bulbous bow on the boats? You know what that does? It decreases fuel consumption, increases speed of the boat. Yet we've had this from the archaeological remains. It goes back about 1,000 years. And when you tell our kids that, you can see them kind of stand up a little bit straighter. This isn't a modern technological advance. We've already had that for over 1,000 years. That knowledge has been lost, but yet it's right here in front of us in ethnographic collections. So the results from our exchange just with the museum in Russia, better understanding of how our material culture look from the cast, our masks, the boat designs. We've done a catalog with them, and that catalog is now probably available online, and you can order that through UAF Press. And it's pretty extensive. Well, flip side, back home, working with a colleague of mine, Church. In 2003, I went down with an elder to do consultation at the Ph.D. Museum at Harvard, and with Ronnie Lind. And we were down there, we looked at the materials, we identified as much as we could, working with T-Rose and part of it was, okay, let's finish up, because Ronnie Lind really wanted to see this 3-man kayak that they had in their storage. And Ronnie Lynn had already had 2 heart bypass surgeries, so I was worried about him having a heart attack climbing these rafters. But he's like, I really want to see this. And so we climbed up, we're looking at this beautiful 3-man kayak. And in fact, they're going to be moving it down this next week for restoration and into their galleries. And you can talk to Trish over here from NT Rose and Sandra, yes. But, so as we're getting down, Ronnie and Lynn is like, hey, Fish, look at the kayak over there. And I'm like, oh, that's an Onami kayak, because if you can see this, if you study kayaks, I just assumed it was a straight, flat, bifurcated bow, which would have been from the Unani region. He's like, come close, I'm going to slap you, get over there. And so I climb over a kayak and a canoe to see it. And sure enough, it's an Alutiiq kayak, the bow, the prow piece, this piece has been busted off, as you can see there. But he's like, what's more important? Look closely. What's sewn into the seams is human hair. And so Ronnie Lynn the next day is going through photographs with was it 2-year-olds? Was it you? No. He was going through the photographs in their photographic collection. And in the collections we have a photograph of a Greenlandic kayak, and then underneath that is an Alutiiq Warriors kayak. And when we found that kayak, when he saw that kayak, he's like, that's an Alutiiq Warriors kayak. And I'm like, how do you know this? He was raised by his grandparents, but the human hair sewn into it has been so, it was something that's important. The human hair is embodying someone's spirit into that piece. So when you see pieces like that, they are very important because they embody someone's spirit. And these are not just small pieces of hair. Well, out of that, I kept in touch with Trish, and we worked back and forth. Said, oh, we got to do this, we got to do this. Well, Trish finally got a grant, wrote a grant through Save American Treasures, and said, okay, let's do this. And so we started working with her team, Peabody. And out of that, we brought down Alfred Nomoff and Susie Malutin to work with the team to start a collaboration so that we can negotiate a 10-year loan for the Warriors kayak to come back home. And again, just to show you the human hair here, and you can see that there. And I can't say enough thank you to Trish and the team, because the kayak is actually another part of us bringing information back home, but putting it back into a living context where people can see it, understand it, and then replicate it themselves. So they actually know how to make it. Working with Alfred, we'll be doing that. Well, the other wonderful part is having access to their collections. And mind you, this is in April. We go down to the collections, and there they have a double-bladed paddle. It's the only known double-bladed paddle that we know of in the world so far that's associated with our material culture. The only known double-bladed paddle. The rest are models. So I sketched that out with Alfred and also whaling lances. Brought that home, and immediately, April, within a month, we had one of our artists make a double-bladed paddle. So instead of being one, now we have 2. And we have other artisans making double-bladed paddles now. So again, it's taking the information that we learn, but immediately putting it back into where it belongs, into the community's hands and their minds. In February of 2012, I discovered a clamshell spoon. I asked my mom in the summer of 2011, hey, if there were so many people here, 10,000 people, why don't we have more spoons? Where are they? She said, oh, we use clamshell spoons. So I just assumed she was talking about a clamshell spoon, to use a clamshell spoon. And so I just kind of put it back in my mind. I'm at the Sheldon Jackson Museum giving a presentation, and I asked the curator, do you guys have anything? She's like, oh, we have a clamshell spoon collected in 1898 by Sheldon Jackson from Carlock. And so she brings that up. I'm like, oh my God. So that was amazing. I get back home 2 days later and ask one of my curators, or registrar, do we have anything that resembles this? And Marnie was like, probably not, but I'll go look. And she goes and looks. 5 minutes later, she comes out with a handle that represents the same thing, and it was put in our box for force shafts for arrows. So we have oral histories, ethnographic account, and archaeological material. I mean, it's just a clamshell spoon, right? Well, it has huge implications for the archaeological material. Because most of the time we just think clamshells are clamshells. Well, now we have to go back and look at what clamshells and see whether or not the breakage pattern is there, whether or not they were used as a spoon in the collections, in the fauna collections. So it adds another bit of information for us as archaeologists. But the wonderful thing is, the girls at Girl Scouts camp, we went and made clamshell spoons, and it was a huge hit. I mean, I was surprised. I was like, oh, let's do clamshell spoons. They're like, okay, great. And they're just, it was like a kid in a candy store. I mean, it was just fun because, I mean, you put that stuff in a living context. In 2010, looking at the petroglyphs, again, as I mentioned, 1,300 petroglyphs, but we are associating with Lake Kachemak and transitional villages during the Kodiak period. There are patterns of symbolic language regarding glyphs. Cape Alutiiq was a major cod processing area in the early Kachemak. OB1 Ground Slate Technology Associated Kodiak area whaling villages. This last sentence is really important for archaeologists because it's the first time we've found whale lances associated with a site from an actual house pit. So Patrick, I mean, he was absolutely amazed to find this because you never find whaling lances in the houses. To find that, so this site's really important in terms of archaeological material, but also in terms of art and inspiration. Carla, we're now working on publication. We've gotten together with many different individuals who've actually done work on Carla. We've gotten articles written, and now we're doing a publication to share Carla, or K1. Well, thanks to K1, this is where the museum got its foundation. We have over 30,000 pieces of preserved organics from that site. From maskets, bentwood bowls, baskets, baleen bracelets, painted wooden boxes. So the site, so that site is pretty extensive, and so we'll be working on that as we go. In 2010, I was contacted in December by Lieutenant Marcus Lupolo. He was doing research, he was looking into bows, and he found this collection in the basement of a high school gymnasium. High school gymnasium. They originally thought the collection had burned in the house. And he contacted me saying, would you mind coming over and seeing and photographing the collection so we know what we're looking at? Well, he was working on his master's and Ph.D. He didn't have to do this. And the wonderful thing is, based on our work, what I strongly continue to support is collaboration and trust. So I went over, I happened to be going over to Potsdam, Germany for an environmental conference with the Polar Research Board then in ICAS. But I extended my stay for 4 days, went over to visit with them, and we got to see the collection. This spruce root hat, we raised $275,000 to purchase one at auction 4 years ago. This one was stuffed into a cubbyhole where the rim was folded over on itself. They had no idea what they had until we went there and shared the knowledge of the spruce root hat, the quiver, the model kayaks, the hats, the bentwood hats. Those were about 22 pieces that they had, gutskin jackets as well. And so Marcus hopefully will share this with the world soon, but as part of his research. But working with him, we found out he's a bowyer. He makes bows. And so we started a relationship of working together using his knowledge. He came out this last August out to one of our culture camps, and he made bows for the museum, but he also worked with us so that we made traditional bows. He was one of the elders. He remembered he was told to go get the arrows as a kid. And he was telling us stories about that, but nobody taught him how to make the bows. So based on what Marcus had learned, studying the Fruheim collection of bows, he was able to take that knowledge reverse that knowledge, and figure out how to make the bows, and then came back and taught us. And then using the archaeological collections, we taught him that making small bows also works for teaching how to make large bows, so you're not wasting a lot of wood. So it was a win-win in terms of a good collaboration, and I look forward to continue working with him. But for me, whales out. We have a lot of things to talk about. We have a lot of things that we're doing. But how do we move forward? How do we keep building the relationship so it becomes a win-win for all of us? One of the things that I've continued to support and continue to move forward with is, for me, using history as bringing back a sense of dignity within our community, but within our future. How do we work together so we can change all the really negative things that I talked about in the beginning, to where we're raising our children making healthier choices, where we can have more April Council Actomans and other successful individuals coming out of our communities. How can we use the museums to do that? One of the things that I didn't have time to put together, but if you go into your museum, you guys have one of these hats here. And I photographed, almost every museum has one of these. Those and kayaks. But I was photographing those, and in 2010, the Kayaks tribe invited us down to Sitka. They wanted to celebrate, to honor, to remember the individuals who died in 1805 that I read from Gideon, to that memory of those people who died in Poison Cove. And they also then sang 6 songs back to us that they had kept alive for us. The Tlingit tribe, I've been told my whole life they're our mortal enemies, yet they kept our songs alive. To be part of that was a real honor, but to be part of singing those songs again was even more. Because we thought our songs were gone, but they were not. We invited them up in the summer of 2011. As I was photographing, I take a lot of photographs. And as I was photographing, I saw one of the young ladies here with this hat. And I'm like, I've seen that hat before. They're like, oh, we only use these when we sing these 6 songs. And I'm sitting there going, wait a minute. These are always called Russian sailors' hats. These are men's hats. Well, no. These are what the hats we use, and only women use them. The women's dance hats. They might have been Russian sailors' hats, but they transformed into being women's dance hats. And so it completely changed this, my understanding of looking at these hats, to where we now have something that's actually a living context of how these hats were used, that have been passed on from generation to generation. And sharing the knowledge and creating new stories, to transforming our future now. I mean, we are the stewards of our land and our future. As I mentioned, as I started with the bear, to focusing on our children, to making sure that they have this information. But also the other thing too is learning from others. What is happening around the world? What is happening here? How do we learn and share this knowledge with each other? In Oaxaca, Monte Alban, looking at what they're doing, what the weavers are doing, what the carvers are doing, and how they're revitalizing their own culture locally. To places like the Orkneys. How are they using the standing stones of Stenes, contextualizing their culture within their community? How are they protecting it? How are they using it for tourists? And how are they actually protecting it for their future? And I mean, these questions we're all asking. But for me, it's lighting the knowledge of knowing within our generations and our future. Or as my mom had told me, achinachtok. That which is within deserves respect. And I think I will end there. So, thank you. I know I gave you guys a lot of information, and I know I've probably talked way too long, but if you have questions.
Any questions or comments?
How many young people are involved on the island? Involved in the culture? Well, the kids, right, for example, next week I'll be working with I'll be working with Coral Chernoff, teaching bone carving. And so we work with all the schools, at least the rural schools right now. We'd like to start working with the city schools. But it depends on the students. It depends on if they can actually stay involved. But a lot of them, when they go away, they go to college, and once they return, they get involved.
What's the percentage?
There's 1,700 Alutiiq on Kodiak, and probably about 600 kids. So I'd say probably about 100 are involved or more, depending on the time of the year.
So your project, in Kodiak, have you inspired what's going on at Alutiiq?
People are interested in what we're doing and why we've been so successful with such a small institution. And you know, they're interested in hearing what we have to do and trying to figure out how they can implement some of these as well.
Thanks a lot for your talk. Giving me so much to think about. And it's really it's moving to hear the kind of projects that you're doing involved in. And I'm wondering if you can tell us something more about the governance structure of the museum and also the funding tools available to you to make all this possible as you think about how to take the lessons you're learning elsewhere.
Well, the governance structure, my board consists of individuals who are appointed by the 6 corporations and the local health organization, CANA. And so working with them, they're the ones who actually help support. They contribute financially for the operations costs, and then from there we apply for grants. So 52% of our budget is grant related, and then private donations and corporate donations. But a lot of it is just going to each of the corporations, continually sharing what we're doing, making sure that we're staying relevant. And it's a challenge. I mean, right now, there's politics going on where if one of the budget cuts that I'm going to be facing is going to be 12% of our budget. So that's huge. And so I have to go and negotiate with them in order so that that doesn't happen, but then we also have to figure out how to adjust to those budget cuts. It's a lot of negotiating, and it's a lot of visiting, a lot of sharing, but also, again, making the information relevant so that they can see what we're doing is and does have an impact. But if you want to learn more about our governance, most of the information is online. Or if you have questions, just send me an email and I'll try to get the information to you.
Institutions, large and small, that have material.
How do I go about identifying materials from our region? Well, it's word of mouth. People sending pictures, like Marcus saying, "Hey, we found this. Can you at least tell me what we're looking at?" To building long-term relationships with the Peabody or the Museum of Anthropology and Ethnography. And building trust. When we first went to the MAE, they were like, "What are you doing here? What do you want?" To now it's like, okay, what kind of projects can we work together on? Same thing with the Russian Ethnographic Museum. Same thing with the museum in Denmark. And so it's building the trust that they know that we're not there to go and take the things, but we're trying to work together to learn from it. And by that, I think people get the word out and then people share it. And so we try to build that.
Are you moving toward a program where you're systematically beating the bushes to find materials that were taken from Kodiak?
I guess it's one museum at a time. I've spent 6 years going back and forth to just the MAE, and you know, we got to photograph the collections, but we still haven't even, we've only scratched the surface for that one museum. And what I hope will happen is we can share the information from these catalogs, but we get other, not just scholars, but other artists going there to learn, because every time an artist goes there to learn, they learn something new that they haven't seen. And then they bring the information back, and they share it, and that spreads on its own. And we're getting more, even like working with Will Anderson from the Kodiak. I mean, Will Anderson negotiated with the Chateau Musée for our museum to have 2 of the masks on a 5-year loan, and those came last week. So we're having others as well doing loans or helping us get loans. So it's not just the museum now, which is actually what we want. We want it to grow out.
As far as archaeological digs and artifacts that you find, I know a lot of native tribes from the north sell items that they find to fund their villages. And, does that happen on Kodiak? And what are your views of that as far as, do you think that's acceptable to sell a history of ancient culture?
Well, the anthropology side, the archaeology side, the first answer is no. Primarily because it's like taking a very flimsy history book and ripping out pages. Every site you destroy more of your own history. You're only hurting yourself. You're only hurting your own community. You might be able to sell those objects, but once those objects are gone and out of context, they're not relevant. They become just another artifact where it doesn't have context, where it doesn't have the significance that it has. And so what we've done since I've been at the museum is we tried to do community outreach to stop the looting. To say, look, selling it, great, it's your land, you can sell it, but this is what's going to happen. And in your reference, for example, St. Lawrence Island, I wish that the community there would stop selling artifacts because they're destroying their own history. And it's a finite resource. At one point, they're going to run out and they're going to have nothing left. They'll not only have destroyed what they have in front of them, they destroyed their own history, their own context to being on that island. But in terms of selling, I don't condone it.
The Kodiak, the town of Kodiak itself is all about the Russians. And I wonder about the Anglo-Russian presence. The museum is a kind of action, not about history. So I wonder if this changed and the presence of the museum.
It has. In terms of Alutiiq presence in the city of Kodiak, it was non-existent until the museum. And within the villages, there's very little knowledge. We didn't know any of this because we didn't have access to it. And most of the time, most of us are just trying to survive. And so now that we have access to it, actually we're able to ask more questions. And Kodiak itself, when the Alutiiq Museum was first founded, the director of the Veronic Museum thought we were trying to take over their job, and we weren't. We're trying to just share Alutiiq culture. And so it's been a process of negotiating with the MacArthur Museum and the Alutiiq Museum to make sure that we don't step on each other's toes, but also we still continue to work together by sharing the histories, both the good and the bad. I think one of the reasons we're still here is because the priests, the Russian Orthodox priests, risked their lives to baptize the people and stop Baranov from exterminating us. But yeah, that question you asked is still something it's still underlying there, but not so much as something that makes people get angry, but it's like, okay, let's figure out how to move past that.
Well, thank you, Sven. I think your talk at your museum was an inspiration for so many small museums. And for my own personal interest, I really hope that you have a chance to go out to all of the other Alaskan regional corporations and give your talk, because so many of them really need I think, some stimulus to get going on that. Because all the time, their areas and their elders are dying off, and so much of this information is being lost, so it really needs to be done. So thank you very much.